big miracles, little miracles, the just, daily provisions. I mean, they astonish me all the time.
Today, we're excited to be joined by Michele Rigby Assad. Michele joined the CIA in January 2002 and spent 10 years serving as an undercover intelligence officer along with her husband, Joseph. Specializing in counterterrorism and counterintelligence, Michele spent the majority of her career in the Middle East, working in Iraq and other secret locations. Today, Michele is a speaker, trainer, international security consultant, and best-selling author. God has led her to and through unimaginable and miraculous situations, and she is using her story in the name of God in numerous ways. Michele, welcome to Discipleship Moments.
Thanks, Kyle and Nadia.
So to start, I know you committed your life to Christ when you were young, but what age did that happen around, and what sparked that committing your life to Christ?
Oh, I was really young, like 4 years old. So,
oh, wow.
Yeah. So I probably didn't know very much of what I was doing, but my mom, asked me, did I want to give my life to Christ? And at 4, I said, yeah, sure. And I said the prayer, and I must have repeated the prayer. And I just don't remember ever being a time where I didn't really love God and actually was quite serious about him.
Right.
Yeah.
That's great.
So growing up in a small town in Florida, how did you find yourself pursuing a career in the CIA?
Oh, I had no idea. Absolutely no idea I would get into the CIA. But right after I graduated high school, I had met this young man named Joseph from Egypt who was putting together a mission trip of students from the university to go to his parents' orphanage and work for a month. So I joined this group of students and went on my first mission trip to Egypt. And that just kicked off this desire to learn about the Middle East and to travel abroad. And that led to a semester abroad in Egypt, which led to getting a master's degree in Arab studies, which eventually led me into the CIA. So it all started with a mission trip.
Wow.
That's crazy.
And interest in a boy, right?
Yes. I mean, yes, it really, I thought Joseph was fascinating. And when I first met him, he gave his testimony about what his life had been like as a Christian in Egypt and the persecution that he had experienced. And he was only 19 years old. And I thought, wow, there are actually people in parts of the world for whom persecution is very real. And I was kind of like, I want to understand Islam and Christianity, and I want to learn more. And so, yeah, Joseph is, we had no idea at that point we'd get married down the road, but I think we kind of fell head over heels with each other pretty soon. We're like, I'm only 17 years old. That's too soon.
Certainly God's plan was, already at work, right?
Yeah, clearly. Yes. Yeah,
So
that's when you realize the hand of God is there. Yeah.
So initially it was just this curiosity around the Middle East, and was that just because of your connection with him, and then that he came from there, and then how did that curiosity, flourish over time?
Yeah, so I feel as if those seeds were planted in my life even younger than that. I used to love National Geographic magazine, and I just absolutely was so fascinated by coming from a small town, and there's all these places in the world that are so different, and it grabbed me. And then also missionaries would come to church and talk about what it was like to minister in these foreign countries, and again, fascinated me. And I think that I have a very natural curiosity to understand why people do what they do. It's like this driver I was born with. Like, I have to understand people. I'm the person, if you looked at my browser on my computer, you'd think I was like a like a serial murderer or something. I'm always trying to understand the weirdest things. So it really was a curiosity. Like, I understand my little culture I grew up with now, but why do they think this way? And yeah, so that's, it just started blossoming. And the more I learned, the more I wanted to learn more.
Right. So when you
Yeah.
were in the CIA, obviously you kept your faith because you're here today. But like what moment in the CIA did you feel like God was like truly there? If there was like one specific time that you felt like
Oh my goodness. Honestly, it was a really hard 10 years full of a lot of dangerous situations, and there wasn't a, you know, like, it's not like we were going to church every Sunday, so it's not
right,
like you had a body or community around you where you could really think a lot about God and your relationship with him. We were like working really, really, really hard, so it was almost like I knew God was there, but I didn't feel him super close in those moments because we were working really hard, working so many hours of the day, and working in war zones. And so, to be very, very clearly honest, I actually was struggling with God, saying, why does it have to be so difficult? Because
right,
even within the CIA, our careers were very hard. We kept getting sent to war zones or pseudo war zones, and my friends kept getting sent to really nice places. And I kept thinking we were getting the short end of the stick. And why, God? Why does everything have to be so tough? And I mean, so did I feel him? You know, not always, but intellectually I knew he was there, and I had to just hang on to that in the moments I didn't understand the
right.
purpose of that path.
Sure.
Even like as Christians too, like not that we go to the CIA or anything, but like there are moments when you have to just like believe that there is a God and trust that he's there, even if you don't truly feel him.
Well, and he develops our story through hardship, right? And that's,
Oh, yeah.
you know, in a lot of times those times is when we don't really feel like he's there, but he's allowing that hardship to happen so that we develop that perseverance to carry forward in his name.
Mm-hmm.
That's 100%. You know, like Nadia, you were saying sometimes you don't feel it. Like, we are, as human beings, we're up and down, and we are irrational sometimes, and we are emotional. And if we followed our feelings, well, we'd be a real mess. And so you have to make a decision. Like for me, I made a decision. Like, either I trust God or I don't. You know, in some moments I might feel like, oh, I understand why I need to trust. And there's moments where I will not understand for a while, but you make the decision. And I think that's a really important in your walk with Christ, to recognize there's moments where you're gonna feel kind of dumpy, and you still gotta keep going.
Yeah.
That's one thing that I feel like a lot of people need to hear too, because like there are times when like it's not always rainbows and butterflies. Like there are gonna be downs within your life and within your Christ walk, and you can't just be like, oh, God's not real, because like why would these bad things be happening to me?
Yes, 100%. And I always say, like, you have to stick in there, stick at it long enough for God to prove himself to you. But we have a very strange idea of time as an American. I mean, we want everything now. It's a very American perception of time, which is instant gratification. If I don't understand it right now, I can't follow it. Like, really? Are you kidding?
Yeah.
And so we have to really alter our mindset in order to walk with Christ, because he operates differently.
Absolutely.
And it's God's timing, not ours, which is what people don't understand.
Yes. Yeah.
So you talked about not being in a, you know, church, and, you know, not being in those communities where it's just God is, you know, Christianity is easy, right?
Right.
You know, naturally in Iraq and, you know, other places that you're a very much a minority, right? What about in just the agency overall, you know, CIA overall, is there, to me, in my mind, it doesn't seem like it'd be a place where there's a lot of believers because of some of the things that are required of you, right? Is that reality, or is that perception?
That's a perception, because there are actually a lot of Christians. in the CIA and Mormons as well. And there are a lot of people who are atheists and agnostic and everything else. I think a lot of people have a misunderstanding of what we do in the CIA, and they think we do all kinds of really awful things. And like, how can you be a Christian and work for the agency? But there's a lot of, again, we don't blackmail, we don't force people to work for us against their will. We don't do nasty things. When we actually develop sources of information, they're there on their own accord. They're there because they want to be there. And so that's generally one giant misunderstanding. I mean, I was never asked to do anything by the CIA that went against my Christian ethics or now I did have a couple of bosses that were terrible, and one boss who was a sociopathic liar. And so there was some issues around him lying and me not being able to go along with that. But that wasn't a quote CIA policy. That was just a person.
Yeah.
Right.
Sure.
Which you can get in any job.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
Yeah, unfortunately. It's life, right? Yeah.
So going along the lines of like your coworkers and believers, whatever, did you like ever share your stories or like change anyone's life within like the CIA to like become believers or no?
I don't think so, because you're working in government, so you just have to be really careful about
Right.
what you say, and people figure out basic things about you.
Mhm.
But again, and we weren't working in places where there was just tons and tons of socialization. We were working in places where it was all work all the time.
Yeah.
So a very different like environment than a normal posting somewhere else. Yeah.
Okay.
Makes sense. So you started to talk about the curiosity about the Middle East, and that was kind of the start of the journey toward your post in the Middle East as a CIA agent. Talk about that journey and how God directed those steps that brought you from curiosity and a mission trip to being in the midst of that region.
So I think this journey is really important to talk about, because you just hear like, oh, she's a CIA agent. Oh, she's just lived a really charmed and interesting life, and everything just poof happens so fast. Not how it actually works. It was interesting because I have seen people walk with God, and He's given them a vision for like, I'm going to be a lawyer or I'm going to be an engineer, and they knew what they were going to be, and they could just focus on it and get there. That's not how God has worked with me. He's worked with me in a very different way. And so that what the way He did it with me was, it was literally just one step at a time. Like this, just take this next step. And most of the time I had no idea where it was leading. And I would say like, I don't get it. Like, I'm committing my life to you. Why isn't it more clear? Like what you want to be? And so as I finally get into Georgetown, I had a hard time getting a job. It was as if, and I'm pretty certain this is what happened, God blocked every wrong door. Like He didn't let me. I'm not one of those people that can accomplish anything on my own. He's like, oh, we're going to have a special relationship. And it's going to be particularly difficult because I will not let you go by accident down the wrong road. I will slam every door in your face. And great, thank God He did. I would have never gotten into the CIA had I gotten those 100 other resumes, worked.
Yeah.
And so there was a lot of rejection. And then till finally in Georgetown, as I'm getting my master's degree, and the CIA came to recruit, as they do in the local universities. And I went and listened to the person talking about what it's like to live undercover, and I ended up putting my resume in that pile of like 500 resumes. So I was deeply surprised when I got a call back. And that's the only call I got, you guys.
Wow.
It was like, it was CIA or bust.
So you didn't have a choice.
So everybody's like, how did you know this is what God had for you? I'm like, well, it was pretty obvious.
So was it kind of like at that time, like fine, like, I guess I'll do this because there's no other option? Or was it something you were genuinely excited about, on
All the
the
above.
front end?
All the above. It literally was like no other door opened. I desperately needed a job. I got into the CIA, which is a very long process. Like, you don't just get in, you go through background investigations and polygraph and intellectual testing and this. I mean, so by the time you get in, like, if you make it through that gauntlet, it's a really good indicator that that's probably where you're supposed to be. So for me, it was just like, it was like, the heavens opened and the light shined down and the angels of heaven were singing. It's like, there you go. There's your door. That's it. Yep.
And sometimes in those moments too, like you said, your path, like God shut all the other doors. Like that can be frustrating for people because it's like, why is this happening to me? But it's like, in the end, it's so worth it.
So I tell people you cannot give up.
Right.
Yeah.
You cannot. If you get angry, like, I will admit I had moments where I'm like, why God? But I never turned on him.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I just said, like, I don't get it. Please help. And I think it's so important for people to understand to not give up in the moments of pain, because if you hang in there long enough, he will reveal the next step to you.
Right.
Nobody likes rejection. Who likes rejection?
Right.
No.
It's like the worst thing on earth is to look for a job. It's like it's so personal. Like, sorry, you're not good enough. Oh, we don't want you. Like, job rejection is one of the most terrible experiences. And when you have dozens and dozens and dozens of those, you're like, well, what am I going to be doing, like, for a living? I have no idea.
Right. Yeah. So I think you touched on it earlier, where the small steps of obedience turn into bigger asks by God, right? What were some of those early on small steps that you took, and that before you were even CIA and out in the field?
Yeah, so we were newly married and we were living on Capitol Hill, and I had a hard time getting a job. And then I just had this, like, the only thing that I knew was I felt a passion to learn and to study the Middle East. So I'm like, if that's all I know, just go with that. So I saved up money and I bought, like, a workbook to start learning Arabic. And then, because back then it was cassette tapes. So you had my little cassette tapes in my workbook. And then I decided, again, because I know nothing else of what to do, I will turn inward and look at what passion is growing inside of me. Keep learning. So I spent money to take Arabic courses at night on Capitol Hill to start learning the language. So again, in the absence of any further information from God, I just decided to develop myself.
Sure.
I will learn, I will develop myself, because that's never a bad thing. It can't hurt anything. That's got to be good, right?
Yeah. So it's just this unending desire to be curious about, that region that God obviously placed on your heart at an early age.
Yeah, and so even without knowing why, I just kept taking that step forward, like, oh, I'll do this and I'll do that. And then I'll apply to Georgetown. And I don't feel smart enough to go to an Ivy League university, but I will apply. And I got in. It was like the ultimate power move is to apply to Georgetown. I got in that program. It was the one time I didn't get rejected. I was like, oh my God, I applied to one place and I got in. Wow. Right. One thing that wasn't hard. So it was just, again, a series of obedient steps. And I almost think that, like, God was saying, can you hang in there? Do you have the perseverance to hang in there? Because I need someone who's really strong. And I'm testing your strength level.
Yeah.
Right.
Makes sense. So tell us about your experience in the CIA as a female and being in those regions where being a female and Christian isn't necessarily, it's not friendly to that, right?
Not a good thing, yeah. Well, back then in the agency, it was people were not aware that women could do the job of a counterterrorism officer dealing with actual terrorists. There was this sense that, like, well, your husband, who's from the Middle East, well, he'll be able to do that job, and so you should take this position that's like one step removed, which was a great job. but it just was a very unfortunate assumption, because no one ever said, like, what do you actually know? What are your skills? Like, what is your expertise? No one got to know me, and I just got like judged on my femaleness, I guess.
Yeah.
And then once I got into the field, you're just being prejudged by everyone who says, woman, you should never leave the home. You should never leave the home without a male escort. Who the heck are you that you're pretending to be a CIA officer and you're young? I mean, at that point in time, I was young, and I'm smiley, I'm friendly, I'm outgoing. I don't really look like the kind of person who should be interacting with really bad people, really, really bad guys. But it turns out that was all wrong. Actually, I'm really good at it, which is a shock for me and everyone else. So
Yeah.
It had to be exhausting, being undercover most all the time, in a foreign land, trying to extract information, and just kind of it's just not a natural environment, right? Was there ever a time where you just were so physically exhausted, mentally exhausted, where God just kind of carried you through and you had to just give it up?
there were so many days in Baghdad. They were, really hard days. We were getting shelled multiple times a day. There were car bombs that woke us up every morning. So a car bomb goes off, it shakes the little pod you're living in. You realize that dozens of people just died. And then you go through your day and you're dealing with intelligence reports about death and destruction. You're dealing with pictures of dead terrorists and pictures of Iraqis tortured by Al Qaeda. Like, that's the content of what you're dealing with all day long. And then you have these really terrible moments where someone is killed. And there was just a day that I couldn't take it anymore. We'd already run into the bunkers like 4 or 5 times that day. Someone had been tortured and passed away. And I just burst into tears and I said, I cannot do another minute in this war zone. Like, I cannot get up tomorrow and still be in Baghdad. But you don't really have another option. You're stuck in Baghdad. And it's Groundhog Day the next day. And so I called my parents and I'm like, please. And I just burst into tears. And I said, please pray for us. I just don't have I feel like I can't keep going. And they must have really just intervened. They just prayed really hard. And somehow the next day I did get up and I did work again. You can do more than you think you can.
Yeah. Especially with God by your side, and with like power, or prayer is so powerful too. Like the fact that you could ask your family for that prayer is like just great, because it's like that gives you so much more power in the long run too.
Yes. Thank God for a family that loves you and prays for you. That's
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Having that support system is very great within God. Yeah.
Yeah, like meeting you is amazing, because when we got to know that we were all believers, like the immediate system of support that you can get from each other, and you guys have reached out and encouraged me so many times, and it just means a lot. It does make you feel stronger. You're not alone, because this world can make you feel like you are sometimes, but you're not. You don't have to be alone. Yeah.
Absolutely. And that's, I think that's a big part of the reason that we were compelled to start these conversations, is to share the stories, right, of what's really happening. Because I think in general in our society, we go home, we close the door, and we don't really talk to people, especially we don't share our adversities, right? And so, and I'm glad you brought up when we first met, because I remember when we first met, and then I read your book. I just felt so compelled, and God was nudging me to reach out to you. And I think if you recall correctly, when we first talked, I'm like, I don't know why God is telling me to call you or like connect with you, but like I feel like there's a reason, and maybe this is the reason now here a couple years later, right? But
well, actually, I was in the moment of a bit of a crisis when you reached out. So this is what's crazy. Like, what does faith look like in motion? It looks like you felt this nudge that you couldn't get rid of, that you needed to reach out to me, and you're like, why? I was on the other end of that in crisis, trying to get book number 2 a publisher. You didn't know that.
Yeah.
And then you guys so graciously have been kind of checking in. How are you doing? How's the book? You want us to pray for the book? Like, honestly, it's the nicest, most wonderful thing to have people that are like, I will drop everything and say a prayer for you and encourage you on the calling that God has placed on your life, like this book number 2. So I mean, that's like God in motion, that dynamism. Like, could God reach in and make everything happen himself? Yeah, of course he could. He's the creator of the universe. But he actually really wants to partner with us. That's
Agreed.
his desire.
He uses us as his hands and feet and mouth, right? And even text messages, whatever, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And like even then, like that, like he said, like he didn't know how that impacted you, but from your perspective, it impacted you so much more. It's like like little things that can take 2 minutes out of your day can make someone's whole day.
Yes. Oh yeah, it's the smallest things that can mean so much. Or you think they're small, but they're not.
Right.
Well, and I think, like we talked about earlier, those are the small acts of obedience. I almost said disobedience. That would have been bad. But those are the small acts of obedience that, frankly, with my walk also, having those conversations with you and really kind of learning how acting in obedience leads to the next step of obedience and the growth. It's been really impactful for me, and I believe that it's part of the reason that God called us to do this, to this podcast also. So you talked about the book that's coming up. Maybe why don't we talk about the what's God doing in your life, post CIA?
Sure. Yeah, so we, after 10 years of being exhausted and far away from our family and on the other side of the world, we really felt like God was moving us on, which is very scary because you don't have a resume and you can't tell people what you've done for 10 years. It's just a very vulnerable place to be. And here we are 12 years later, again, being obedient. We run our own consulting firm. So we do a lot of international projects. We do advisory for businesses working in the Middle East. People tend to call us when there's trouble or there's difficulties, or so we do a lot of unconventional type projects. And I guess probably the most unconventional project was the last story of Breaking Cover, which is an opportunity back in 2015 when ISIS was taking over parts of Iraq. There was this need to try to help Iraqi Christians who fled their ancient homelands and went into the Kurdistan part of Iraq. And so that was the most unconventional project post-CIA, was trying to figure out how to use this unique set of skills that God spent 10 years developing in us. When I was crying and complaining about, like, Lord, why is it so hard? He was like, just wait, because I have some things you need to do, but you can't do them if you don't learn some really difficult things. Like, you can't become a terrorism expert by serving in Paris. Like, you got to go a war zone. Like, you can't learn how to carry out complex operations in difficult places if you're in London or Vienna. Like, you just can't. Like, you've got to be in a difficult place. And so this project came to us, and then it was kind of like this perfect presentation of, like, why you have to walk the hard roads, because I need you to help other people. And you need a certain level of knowledge and a certain your skills have to be developed so I can use you in a powerful way.
Right. And God uses people in so many different powerful ways that, like, you don't even know of in the moment.
Yeah.
So how did that mission, for lack of a better, I don't know if you'd call it a mission or not.
Sure.
How did that mission come to be? How did you know that was where God was sending you next?
Okay, that's such a great question. I love it. Okay, so I'm one of those, I don't know if I'm weird, but some people think I'm weird, where I feel like I hear the voice of God talking to me, not audibly, but it is almost like within yourself, and it's not your own brain. Like, when you hear it, like, that was not me, because I wasn't thinking about anything like that.
Right.
So I've had these moments in my life where they're targeted, like God will say something, and I heard him say, Joseph needs to contact his old boss. And this came to me for like a month. And I kept saying, Joseph, I don't know why, but I feel like God's telling us you need to contact your old boss. And he was like busy doing other things. And then after like 3 or 4 weeks of this, it felt in my spirit and my soul as if God was shouting at me, like, tell him to contact her now. And then I'm like, for the love of God, please, Joseph, contact your ex. So he contacted her finally once I was about to explode. And she's like, I can't believe you just reached out. I've been trying to find you. And I had no idea where in the world you were. But I've just been brought into this incredible project to try to find a country willing to take persecuted Christians. And we've got people who can do the advocacy part. We've got people who can do the fundraising part, but we don't have anybody to do the ops on the ground part.
Yeah.
And I thought of you. So here it was, I'm
That's
hearing
crazy.
God saying, like, call this woman. And she's like, thank you for calling me. I mean, these are the things you're like, and that was a God move. Like,
Right.
Yeah. So it's God inspired, right? So
Yeah.
then everything's got to be so smooth after that.
sure.
No? So what happened next?
There was nothing smooth about anything. Like always. It was like, I mean, honestly, when you read the end of Breaking Cover, it reads like a Hollywood movie, and it felt like a Hollywood movie. I tell you, there were moments I was like, where am I? Am I like acting or something? Like everything that could go wrong went wrong. I mean, it was just like the worst period of time in the history of the planet to say to a country, would you like to take some refugees? Because in 2015, refugees were spilling in every border of Europe, from land, by sea. I mean, they had refugees coming out of their ears. I said to the Lord, I was like, are you kidding me? Like, this is the worst time you could ever ask someone, can you take some refugees? Would you like to resettle some persecuted people? No, nobody did. Except we found after, so in the space of only 3.5 months, which is such a miraculous period of time, we were brought into this project. We were given the impossible mission. We found people to work with. We found one country willing to say yes. And we were able to do like a flight out of Kurdistan in the middle of a time when no other flights, like the airports were shut down. This is going to sound so familiar after what just happened in the last couple of days with the Israel-Gaza war. But Russia was shooting missiles across Iraqi airspace at ISIS targets in Syria. So they'd shut the Iraqi airspace down hours before we were literally supposed to board this airplane and take these people, these Iraqis, to their new country. So even when we finally thought like we're at the finish line, no, you're not. Because this whole thing came in from out of nowhere, but it showed the hand of God. It's like when God wills it, nothing can stand in the way. And by his hand, and not because the cleverness of Joseph or Michelle, no, we couldn't get anything done. By the hand of God, there was one aircraft in Kurdistan, and miraculously got the owner of that aircraft to cancel what he had it for and give it to our people. And like 4 days later, we were able to fly them out of Iraq to their new country in Slovakia.
Wow.
But there was nothing easy about it, no.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, of course, it sounds like this mission was under attack too, right? I mean,
Yes.
there was the devil did not want this to happen, right? And God cleared the path. Not only was there an aircraft available, that was the only one to get out, it was big enough to carry all of the people, right? Which, I mean,
Yes.
it's not a, no, you know, there's certainly a lot of aircrafts that can carry that many people, but, you know, there's a lot of them that can't also, right?
Right.
Did you say how many people there were?
149.
149.
And that
Wow.
this was the only aircraft that was given permission to leave that airspace. Like no Western aircraft were coming near Iraq. Like we couldn't pay enough money to get people to come. That's why it was like the impossible mission once again. And miraculously, we found someone who knew the owner of the aircraft, which was such a miracle. So
Yeah.
honestly, to God be the glory. Like when he wills it, it will happen. And when there's people's lives at stake, of course there's going to be an adversary that doesn't want you to save lives.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
But God is greater.
God is greater.
God is greater. We live, you know, in the United States, we live a fairly, you know, comfortable life, right? And I think a lot of times it's hard for us to believe that there's truly miracles happening right now, and that God is this active, because, you know, our life is just, you know, we're not really at risk of being persecuted or, you know, being attacked. And frankly, part of it is I think that, you know, we tend to live pretty lukewarm Christianity lives, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I just tell people, like, yeah, we live very charmed lives in the United States when you see what life is actually like in most other countries. But then you say, okay, challenge me, God. I'm willing to be challenged. I'm willing to have, you know, I'm willing to be uncomfortable to do things that matter, which usually involve doing things for other people. Like your faith isn't really your faith unless it's in motion helping someone. And God wants to use us. He really, really wants. He's a gentleman. He doesn't force himself on anyone. Like,
right.
but if we give him that space, which I'm just committed to doing, like I told God the other day, I want to be astonished by you. I want to see you do big things, and I'm willing to sacrifice my own desires or, you know, silly little things or to be comfortable if that's going to advance your cause and bring other people to know how much you love them.
Right.
Yeah.
And taking a step in your faith like that is uncomfortable, but it's always rewarding. Like, there's so many times in your faith that you're going to have to take an uncomfortable step out.
Yes.
It's most of the time we have to step out of our comfort zone, right? Because, you know, that next step, that next act of obedience is pushing us to the new comfort level or discomfort level.
Right, which eventually, once you learn how to do what he wants you to learn how to do, it goes from discomfort to comfort. So as an example, I'm a homebody. Really? You're a homebody? You lived in the Middle East for 10 years. You've traveled to 47 countries. Look what God can do with a homebody. Now, because I have gotten out of my comfort zone and I've been willing to do all these crazy things, I now desire that. I now have wanderlust. I want to travel. So you can change.
Right.
Yeah. I found that interesting that you just said that you told God you want to be astonished by what he does. To me, it sounds like you've already had those experiences to be astonished, right? And obviously,
I have been astonished.
You know, it's
big miracles, little miracles, the just, you know, daily provisions. I mean, they astonish me all the time, and that's why I have a prayer journal where I write down when things happened and how they happened. And, you know, you look back and you see, you're like, wow, look at what he did. But I want more.
Right.
So you touched on the book Breaking Cover, which it's a best-selling book. And it certainly reached me, and this is your act of obedience to God to write the book, right? Was it something that you came back from the you know, the trip to move the refugees and like, I got to write a book, or was it something that you was outside of your comfort zone with that also?
Way outside my comfort zone. I've met all kinds of people like, oh, I've always dreamed of writing a book. I'm like, oh my gosh, I never wanted to write a book. And when I felt God calling me to do it, I was like again, like, are you kidding?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure you can find smarter people who know how to write books to do this thing you want. And, but it was such a strong calling, so strong. Like I again felt like I heard the voice of God, very like, it's time to write your book. And I'm like, what book are you talking about? And I would need that. I would need to hear his voice giving me those marching orders. And I realized something, like, it's going to be hard. So I need to know that I know that I know that I'm called to do it, because it's going to be really, it took me 7 years from calling to the publication of that book. 7 years. Once again, I don't do anything quickly.
Yeah.
I'm on a slow train, because I usually have no idea what I'm doing, but God provides.
Sure. So what are the doors that God opened in that process that were clearly God inspired moments?
First of all, you have to have an agent, and getting an agent is an act of God. And so, yeah, I saw that act of God because I actually got an agent after years of trying, absolute years of rejection. And then you have to find a publisher, and I didn't have a platform. I'm not a Kim Kardashian. I don't have all these tons of followers, yet God led me to the perfect publisher who said, we get you, we get what you're trying to do, and we want to publish your book. And that's Tyndale. And that was another act of God. And it's just not easy to get either one of those. And then, to be able to feel like I'm not smart enough to write a book, and then to write a book where people say, I couldn't put it down, it touched me at the deepest part of my soul, then I know that God enabled me to do what I did.
Right.
Yeah.
By the power of God, really. And to have people still come to me, it was published in 2018, so it's 6 years, and still telling me all the time how it's affected them and how it's helped them to see life differently, or appreciated how they need to persevere and be stronger and all of that. That's a God thing.
Absolutely.
I was
Absolutely.
obedient. I didn't feel capable, and I did it anyway.
Right.
Absolutely. Interesting. Do you so you touched on that there's another book coming out?
Yes.
What can you share? What's the unveiling, or where are we at with that process?
Yeah, so again, the timetable is a little bit unsure, only because I still have to get the CIA, to clear certain sections of it. And so I don't know how long it'll take, but I'm expecting it to be published by the end of this year, 2024.
Okay.
And it's called Get Off the X. And so really it's a call to get out of the comfort zone. It's a call to persevere so that you can find the path that you're supposed to be traveling in your life. Just because I know that that's really hard thing to do. So it's like my effort to use my experience to help other people get unstuck, find their path. I got a PhD. I've got a PhD in getting stuck and getting unstuck. So
there you go. You're the most qualified to talk about it.
I am. Am I ever? Yes, indeed. So yeah, that's book number 2.
That's fantastic. We our last guest, talked about depression and anxiety, and one of the things that he talked about as well is just taking that little step each day, and basically, like you said, getting unstuck. And I think that applies to so many things in life. Just start to build momentum, and whether it's following God, or climbing out of depression, or getting better at crocheting, or whatever it is, right?
Yeah. Anything.
All
We
take
tend to think we got to
steps.
do these big grand plans. Like, I either go big or go home. No, actually, most of the time it's literally that tiny, stupid little thing right in front of your face. Just do that. And then the next
Yeah.
stage, do one more of those. Like, they're so powerful.
Right.
Absolutely. I think that your story is incredibly compelling. I think it's awesome to hear the stories of miracles that are happening right now in our world, and you're living them. And I really appreciate you joining us and sharing your story.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Nadia. Thanks, Kyle.
Miracles are not Bible stories only. God is actively working miracles around us today. Michele has experienced and continues to experience God working in miraculous ways. If you have experienced a miracle you'd like to share with us, please send us a message. Thanks for joining us on Discipleship Moments. Please subscribe if you enjoy hearing God's stories in action today.